What you're about to hear isn't just a story. It's a chilling look at a nightmare hundreds face every day. It's about a man, a routine traffic stop, and the terrifying moment power is abused. But this time, there was a witness no one expected. This is the story of a police officer who thought he had absolute authority. A black man who refused to be a statistic, and the senator in the passenger seat who changed everything. Stay with us to see how one man's demand to search a car ignited a firestorm that exposed a rot deep within the system. The Georgia sun beat down on the asphalt of I-285, the sprawling orbital freeway that choked Atlanta in a perpetual concrete hug. It was the kind of heat that made the air shimmer, turning distant cars into watery apparitions. David Harris gripped the leather-clad steering wheel of his Mercedes E-Class, the cool, recycled air from the vents, a welcome respite from the sweltering afternoon. He was humming along to a quiet jazz station, his mind on the presentation he had nailed just hours earlier. A promotion was on the horizon. He could feel it like a subtle vibration in his chest, a counter-rhythm to the bass line thrumming from the speakers. Beside him, State Senator James Davenport, a man whose silver hair and immaculately tailored suit seemed to defy the oppressive humidity, was reviewing notes on a tablet. The senator was a friend, a mentor, and the reason for David's good mood. David, a senior policy advisor, had just helped the senator deliver a landmark speech on economic development to the Atlanta Chamber of Commerce. It had been a triumph. They were eating out of your hand. James, David said, breaking the comfortable silence. The senator looked up, a rare, unguarded smile creasing the corners of his eyes. We make a good team, David. Your data gave the argument teeth. Those zoning reform stats. That was the knockout punch. David grinned, a genuine, full-faced expression of pride and relief. At 34, he had worked tirelessly to get where he was. A graduate of Morehouse College and then Georgetown Law, he had sidestepped the lucrative but soul-crushing world of corporate law to pursue a passion for public service. Working for Senator Davenport was the culmination of that dream. It was meaningful work. It mattered. He glanced in his rearview mirror, a reflexive habit honed by years of driving in Atlanta's notoriously aggressive traffic. A black-and-white Ford Explorer, the signature vehicle of the Georgia State Patrol, was closing the distance behind them at a steady, deliberate pace. David's heart didn't flutter. He wasn't speeding. His car was new, the registration and insurance were up to date, and his license was clean. He was a model citizen in every sense of the word. He adjusted his position slightly, ensuring he was perfectly centered in his lane. The patrol car maintained its position, a silent, predatory shadow clinging to his bumper. A knot began to form in David's stomach, a cold, familiar dread that had nothing to do with guilt and everything to do with experience. He was a black man in a luxury car. In certain parts of the country, and certainly in certain counties in Georgia, that was enough. It was a calculus he had learned as a teenager, a bitter pill of reality that contradicted every civics lesson he'd ever been taught. Don't look now, David said, his voice a low murmur, but I think we're about to get pulled over. Senator Davenport glanced back. What for? You're driving like a chauffeur. I-285. A Benz. My face, David said, tapping his cheek lightly. Sometimes that's all the reason they need. He hated the cynicism in his own voice, but it was a shield, a way to prepare for the indignity he felt was coming. As if on cue, the placid Georgia sky was ripped apart by the piercing wail of a siren. Red and blue lights flashed, painting the interior of the Mercedes in strobing hues of anxiety. David's shoulders tightened. He signaled his movements precise and calm, and began to ease the car onto the right shoulder of the highway. The roar of passing trucks was a deafening wall of sound. He brought the car to a smooth stop, the wheels kicking up a small cloud of red Georgia dust. He turned off the radio. In the sudden silence, the sound of his own breathing seemed unnervingly loud. He instructed himself silently, running through the checklist he had mentally rehearsed 1,000 times. Hands on the wheel. Turn on the interior lights. Don't make any sudden movements. Be polite. Don't give them an excuse. Stay calm, David. Senator Davenport said, his voice now laced with concern. This is probably just a mistake. David offered a tight, humorless smile. Probably. A figure emerged from the patrol car. The officer was tall and broad-shouldered, with a military-style haircut. His sunglasses were reflective, turning his eyes into inscrutable silver discs. He approached the passenger side of the vehicle first, his hand resting casually on the butt of his holstered firearm. This was unusual. The standard approach was to the driver's side. David's dread intensified. This wasn't routine. This was a statement. The officer, whose name tag read Miller, rapped his knuckles sharply on the passenger side window. David pressed the button to lower all the windows, flooding the car with the thick, hot air and the smell of exhaust fumes. "Good afternoon, Officer David," said his voice, steady. His hands still planted firmly at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. Officer Miller ignored him, his gaze fixed on David, looking past the senator as if he were a pane of glass. "License, registration, and proof of insurance," he said, his voice flat and devoid of any warmth. It was a command, not a request. Senator Davenport, accustomed to a certain level of deference, began to speak. "Officer, I'm not sure why." Miller cut him off, a sharp, dismissive gesture of his hand. "Sir, I'm speaking to the driver. Please remain quiet." The senator's mouth closed, a flicker of disbelief in his eyes. He wasn't used to being silenced. David, however, knew this script all too well. De-escalate, comply, survive. "Of course," Officer David said. He slowly, deliberately reached for the glove compartment. "I'm just reaching for my registration and insurance. They are right here." He handed the documents along with his driver's license out the window to the officer. Miller took them without a word, his eyes scanning the paperwork. He held David's license up to the light, then looked from the photo to David's face, then back again. The silence stretched thick and suffocating. Each passing truck felt like a drumbeat marking the passage of time. "David Harris Miller," said, tasting the name as if it were something foreign. "This is a nice car. You own it?" The question was a classic of the genre, a seemingly innocuous inquiry loaded with insinuation. David's jaw tightened. "Yes, officer, I do." "And what do you do for a living?" "Mr. Harris, to afford a car like this." The senator shifted in his seat, his posture rigid with indignation. "Officer, that is a completely inappropriate question. What does his profession have to do with this traffic stop?" Miller's head snapped toward the senator, his jaw working. "Sir, I have instructed you to remain quiet. This is an official police investigation. Your interference is noted." He turned his mirrored gaze back to David. "I asked you a question, Mr. Harris." David took a slow breath, forcing the anger down. Answering the question would validate it. Refusing would escalate the situation. He chose a middle path. "Officer, with all due respect, is there a reason you pulled me over? Was I speeding? Did I make an illegal lane change? Miller smirked a cruel, knowing curl of his lip. We'll get to that. First, you're going to answer my questions. What do you do? I work in public policy, David said, keeping his voice even. Public policy, Miller repeated, drawing the words out. He tapped the Mercedes emblem on the steering wheel. Pays pretty well, does it? Or are you a consultant of some kind? The emphasis on consultant was thick with implication, a thinly veiled suggestion of illicit activity. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush that crept up David's neck. He was being profiled, stereotyped, and stripped of his dignity on the side of a highway for the crime of driving while black in an expensive car. The injustice of it was a bitter, metallic taste in his mouth. Officer David said, his voice straining to remain respectful. I am a policy advisor for the state legislature. This is my vehicle. I have committed no crime. Could you please tell me why I was stopped? Miller's smirk widened. He seemed to be enjoying this, drawing it out, savoring the power imbalance. I pulled you over because you failed to signal a lane change back there. About a mile back. David's mind reeled. He was meticulous about signaling. It was second nature. He knew with absolute certainty that he had signaled every lane change. It was a lie, a pretext, the oldest one in the book. I'm quite certain I signaled. Officer David said, trying to keep the frustration out of his voice. Well, I'm quite certain you didn't, Miller retorted, his voice hardening. And my certainty is the one that matters right now. Now I'm smelling a strong odor of marijuana coming from this vehicle. This was the escalation David had been dreading. The air in the car was clean, smelling only of leather and the faint citrusy scent of the air freshener clipped to the vent. There was no marijuana. There had never been any marijuana. It was a phantom, a ghost conjured by the officer to justify what he wanted to do next. Officer. That's impossible, Senator Davenport said, his voice booming with authority. There is no marijuana in this car. I can personally vouch for that. Miller turned his full attention to the senator, his patience clearly gone. Sir, for the last time, you will keep your mouth shut. I don't know who you think you are, but in this situation you are a passenger in a vehicle under investigation. Nothing more. He leaned in closer, his face inches from the senator's. Do you understand me? The senator, a man who regularly debated governors and corporate titans, was momentarily stunned into silence by the sheer raw aggression. Miller straightened up, his focus back on David. Harris, I'm going to need you to step out of the car. David's heart hammered against his ribs. This was the point of no return. Once he was out of the car, he was completely vulnerable. Officer, am I under arrest? David asked, his voice shaking slightly. Not yet, Miller said. But your cooperation will go a long way in determining how the rest of this stop goes. Now step out of the car. Slowly. On what grounds are you ordering me out of the vehicle? David pressed, his legal training kicking in despite the fear. The grounds are that I have probable cause to believe there are illegal narcotics in this vehicle based on the strong odor I detect. Miller said, his voice dripping with condescension. And I am giving you a lawful order. Are you going to comply, or are you going to resist? The word resist hung in the air, a threat cloaked in procedure. David knew what it meant. It was the magic word that could turn a traffic stop into a beat-down or worse. He looked at Senator Davenport, whose face was now a mask of pale fury. The senator gave him a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. "Don't get out." But David knew that refusing a direct order, even an unlawful one, was a dangerous gamble. He had a family, a future. He couldn't afford to become a hashtag. "Okay," Officer David said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm stepping out." Miller took a step back from the car, his hand once again resting on his gun. "Put your hands on your head and step out slowly. Real slowly." As David reached for the door handle, a wave of despair washed over him. This was it. This was how it happened. The speech, the promotion, the life he had built so carefully it could all be shattered in the next few minutes on the side of this highway, all because of a lie. He was about to open the door when the senator, who had been silently fuming, finally spoke. His voice was no longer pleading or indignant. It was cold, sharp, and carried an weight that Miller had not yet appreciated. "Officer Miller, Senator Davenport," said his tone leaving no room for interruption. "Before my advisor does anything, I suggest you listen to me very carefully." Miller turned, irritation flashing across his face. "What did I say about—" "I am State Senator James Davenport," he said, his voice cutting through the officers. He reached into his breast pocket and slowly, deliberately produced a small leather wallet containing his official identification. "I am the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. That's the committee, in case you've forgotten, that oversees the budget and operations of the Georgia State Patrol." He held the ID up for Miller to see. "And I am telling you right now that there is no odor of marijuana in this car. There are no drugs. There was no traffic violation. What is happening here is an abuse of power, and I am witnessing it firsthand." Miller's smug demeanor faltered. He stared at the gold-embossed credential, then at the senator's face, then back again. The reflective sunglasses couldn't hide the sudden uncertainty, the dawning horror of a man who realized he had just pulled a gun on a king while thinking he was just a pawn. The senator wasn't finished. His voice dropped, becoming even quieter, yet more menacing. "You have two options, officer. You can apologize to Mr. Harris, return his documents, and we can all be on our way. Or you can proceed with this charade. And I promise you, if you choose the latter, you will spend the rest of your career, however short it may be, regretting it. I will personally see to it that your actions here today are scrutinized under the brightest, most unforgiving light imaginable. The choice is yours." The roar of the traffic on I-285 seemed to fade away. The world had shrunk to the space between the three men. David sat frozen, his hand still on the door handle, watching the confrontation unfold. The power dynamic had shifted so violently, so completely, that the air itself seemed to crackle with the change. Officer Miller stood on the dusty shoulder of the highway, the senator's words hanging in the air like a death sentence. And in that moment, David Harris understood that this was no longer just about a traffic stop. It was about a reckoning. A bead of sweat trickled down Officer Miller's temple, disappearing into the collar of his uniform. The mirrored sunglasses suddenly seemed less like a tool of intimidation and more like a flimsy shield. For the first time since he'd approached the Mercedes, he truly looked at the man in the passenger seat. The tailored suit, the silver hair, the unwavering steely gaze, it all clicked into place. This wasn't some loudmouth lawyer. This was power. Real power. The kind that didn't just file complaints, but chaired the committees that signed your department's checks. The smirk that had been plastered on Miller's face had vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed pallor. The swagger drained out of him, leaving a hollowed-out shell of authority. He looked from the senator's ID to David, then back to the senator. The silence was deafening, broken only by the whoosh of passing cars. Senator Miller began, his voice raspy, a pale imitation of the commanding tone he had used moments before. I didn't realize. That's the problem, isn't it? Officer Senator Davenport shot back, his voice like chipping ice. You don't realize. You don't see a citizen, a taxpayer, a man driving home from his job. You see a stereotype. You see a target, and you act on that prejudice without a second thought. What you failed to realize is that today your prejudice picked the wrong car. Miller swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He was backpedaling frantically, trying to find reverse in a situation that was careening downhill with no brakes. Sir, with all due respect, I smelled marijuana. That's a fact. I have a duty to investigate. A fact. The senator's laugh was a short, sharp bark of contempt. Don't you dare stand there and lie to my face. We both know what this is. It's a fishing expedition. You invent a reason to stop him, invent a reason to search and hope you find something, anything, to justify the harassment. It's a disgusting, unconstitutional abuse of the badge you wear, and you did it so brazenly, so shamelessly. You thought you were untouchable. The accusation hit its mark. Miller's face, what David could see of it, flushed a deep, blotchy red. He was a predator caught in a trap of his own making. He snatched David's license and registration from his clip and practically shoved them back through the window. Look, this is a misunderstanding, he stammered. There's no need to take this any further. You're free to go. Oh, we're not going anywhere just yet, the senator said, his voice dangerously calm. First, I want your name and badge number. Not just Miller. Your full name. The officer hesitated, his eyes darting back toward his patrol car as if contemplating flight. Now, officer, the senator commanded. It's Officer Mark Miller. Badge number 734. He mumbled the words, tasting like ash in his mouth. Thank you, Officer Mark Miller. Badge number 734. The senator said, each word precise and cold. Now I want you to do something. I want you to apologize to Mr. Harris. Not to me. To him. For the baseless stop, for the insulting questions, for the false accusation, and for the humiliation you have put him through on the side of this public highway. Miller's head whipped around to look at David. Apologize. Cops like Miller didn't apologize. Apology was weakness. It was an admission of guilt. In his world, you dominated, you controlled, you never, ever backed down. But staring into the unwavering gaze of the senator, he knew he was no longer in his world. He was in theirs. He looked at David, his eyes finally stripped of their mirrored protection. David could see it now, a simmering resentment, a wounded pride, and beneath it all, a flicker of fear. Miller started the words, catching in his throat. He cleared it, a rough, gravelly sound. I apologize for the inconvenience. The apology was weak, pathetic, and utterly insincere. It was the apology of a man forced to his knees. That's not good enough, David said, speaking for the first time since the senator had taken control. His voice was quiet, but it resonated with a newfound strength. He had been a passenger in his own harassment, a spectator to his own defense. No more. He unbuckled his seatbelt. David. What are you doing? The senator asked, a note of caution in his voice. It's all right, David said. He opened the car door and stepped out, standing to his full height. He wasn't as broad as Miller, but he stood straight, His suit jacket now rumpled his tie slightly askew. He was no longer just the driver. He was a man, reclaiming his dignity. He faced Miller directly. "You didn't inconvenience me, officer. You threatened me. You lied. You treated me like a criminal because of the color of my skin and the car I drive. You abused your authority to intimidate and harass me. That's not an inconvenience. It's a violation. And I want to hear you say you're sorry for that." The raw honesty of David's words hung in the hot, stagnant air. This was no longer about procedure or politics. It was about a fundamental wrong that demanded to be made right. Miller stared at David, a tempest of conflicting emotions warring in his eyes. He was cornered. To give a real apology was to admit everything David had accused him of. To refuse was to defy the senator who held his career in his hands. He chose a third option, deflection. "I was doing my job," he said, his voice a low growl. "This area. We get a lot of drug traffic up and down this corridor. I had reasonable suspicion." "Reasonable suspicion?" The senator interjected, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You mean the black man in a nice car suspicion? Is that what they're teaching at the academy these days? Because if it is, the Judiciary Committee is going to have a long, hard look at your training curriculum and your funding. A very, very long look." The threat was not subtle. It was a sledgehammer. The mention of the Racial Justice Act, a piece of legislation the senator himself had championed to combat exactly this kind of profiling, hung unspoken in the air. Miller's resolve finally crumbled. The fight went out of him, replaced by a desperate, panicked need for self-preservation. He looked at David, his gaze finally dropping to the ground. "I apologize," he said, the words forced, strangled. "I was mistaken. I am sorry for my actions. It was the best they were going to get, and they all knew it." David nodded slowly, a sense of grim satisfaction settling over him. It wasn't a victory, not really. It was just a brief, fleeting moment of accountability, bought and paid for by the presence of a powerful man. What happened to the men who didn't have a senator in the passenger seat? The thought sent a chill down his spine, despite the suffocating heat. "We have your name and badge number. Officer Miller." The senator said, his tone final. "This conversation is over. But I assure you the consequences are just beginning. You can return to your vehicle now." Without another word, Miller turned and walked back to his patrol car. His stride was no longer the confident swagger of a lawman on the prowl. It was the defeated shuffle of a man who had overplayed his hand and lost everything. He got into his car, started the engine, and pulled back onto the highway, disappearing into the river of traffic without a backward glance. David and the senator stood on the shoulder for a moment, the silence between them heavy with the echoes of the confrontation. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving David feeling shaky and exhausted. "Are you all right?" the senator asked, placing a hand on David's shoulder. David let out a long, shuddering breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Yeah, I think so." He looked at his hands. They were trembling. "Thank you, James. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been here." "I know what would have happened," the senator said, his face grim. "You would have been on the side of the road, hands on your car, while he tore it apart looking for something that doesn't exist. And when he found nothing, he would have either let you go with a bogus ticket or found a way to arrest you anyway. Because men like that can't stand to be wrong. They can't stand to have their authority challenged." He paused, his eyes fixed on the spot where the patrol car had been. "This isn't over, David. Not by a long shot. That man is a liability. He's a lawsuit waiting to happen and a danger to the community he's sworn to protect. I'm calling the superintendent of the State Patrol personally. Tonight, we're filing a formal complaint. We're going to get his records, dashcam footage, everything. We're going to make sure that hard karma, as you young people say, hits him like a freight train. David got back into the car, his heart still pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The cool air of the Mercedes felt different now, less like a luxury and more like a sanctuary. He looked at the senator, a man he had respected for his political acumen, but now saw in a new light. He had seen the fire of justice in his eyes. He picked the wrong car, David said, quietly repeating the senator's earlier words. He picked the wrong car, the senator agreed. And he's about to find out just how badly he miscalculated. As David pulled back onto the interstate, the smooth hum of the engine, a comforting sound, he knew this was no longer just his story. It was bigger now. The incident on the side of I-285 was not an ending. It was a beginning. It was the first tremor of an earthquake that was about to shake the foundations of Officer Miller's world, and he, David Harris, would be standing right at the epicenter. The sun had long since set, but the lights of Atlanta burned bright, a sprawling constellation of human ambition. In his home office, a room lined with books on law history and political theory, Senator Davenport sat behind a large mahogany desk. The earlier fire of his anger had cooled, forged now, into a cold, hard resolve. He held his phone to his ear, the voice on the other end belonging to Colonel Marcus Thorne, the superintendent of the Georgia State Patrol. Thorne was a man Davenport knew well. They had navigated budget hearings and legislative battles for years. Their relationship was one of professional respect, but the tone of this call was anything but routine. Marcus, I'm not calling to debate the finer points of your budget request, Davenport said, his voice low and serious. I'm calling to report one of your officers for gross misconduct. I'm talking about profiling intimidation and manufacturing probable cause. And I'm not talking about a story I heard, Marcus. I'm talking about something I witnessed firsthand from the passenger seat of the car. He pulled over. He proceeded to recount the entire incident, his words precise and methodical, like a prosecutor laying out his case. He detailed Officer Miller's pretextual stop, the insulting and accusatory questions, the phantom smell of marijuana, the order for David to exit the vehicle, and the officer's immediate, almost comical change in demeanor the moment he realized who he was dealing with. He left nothing out. On the other end of the line, Colonel Thorne was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with a weary resignation. James Oss, I am appalled. There is no excuse for that kind of behavior. None. I'm glad we agree, Marcus Davenport said. Because I want a full investigation. I want Officer Mark Miller, badge number 734, placed on administrative leave immediately pending the outcome of that investigation. I want the dash cam and body cam footage from his vehicle and his person pulled and preserved, and I want a complete record of his traffic stops complaints and use of force incidents for the past 5 years. It was not a request. It was a demand, and both men knew it. You'll have it, Thorne said without hesitation. I'll initiate an internal affairs investigation first thing in the morning. Captain Eva Rostova will handle it personally. She's my best. She's thorough, and she's tough. Nothing gets by her. Good, Davenport replied. She can start by interviewing my policy advisor, Mr. David Harris. The man your officer harassed and threatened today. and then she can interview me." The call ended, but the wheels of justice, so often slow and grinding, had just been given a powerful shove. A process had been set in motion that Officer Miller, in his wildest, most arrogant dreams, could never have anticipated. 2 days later, David Harris sat in a sterile, windowless room in the headquarters of the Georgia State Patrol. The air smelled of stale coffee and bureaucracy. Across a metal table sat Captain Eva Rostova. She was a woman in her late 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Her uniform was crisp, her demeanor professional, but there was a no-nonsense intensity about her that David found both reassuring and intimidating. "Mr. Harris," she began, her voice calm and even. "Thank you for coming in. I want to assure you that we are taking this matter with the utmost seriousness. My job is to gather the facts wherever they may lead. I want you to walk me through the entire incident from the moment you first saw Officer Miller's vehicle. Don't leave anything out, no matter how small it may seem." David took a breath and began his story. He recounted the events with the precision of a lawyer and the raw emotion of a man who had been deeply wronged. He described the feeling of dread as the patrol car followed him. The condescending tone of Miller's voice, the absurdity of the questions about his profession, the blatant lie about the smell of marijuana. He described the fear he felt when he was ordered out of the car, the feeling of utter powerlessness. Captain Rostova listened intently, her pen flying across a legal pad, her expression unreadable. She asked clarifying questions, her inquiries sharp and to the point. "Did he ever state his probable cause before accusing you of possessing narcotics? Did you feel you were free to leave at any point before the senator identified himself? Describe his tone of voice when he addressed the senator versus when he addressed you." The interview lasted for nearly 2 hours. By the end, David was emotionally drained, but he also felt a sense of catharsis. He had been heard. His experience had been validated, recorded, and entered into an official record. Later that day, Senator Davenport had his own meeting with Captain Rostova. His account mirrored David's, but he added a layer of political and legal context that gave the complaint even more weight. "Captain," he said, leaning forward in his chair, "this isn't just about one bad cop. This is about a culture." Officer Miller felt empowered to act the way he did, because he believed there would be no consequences. He saw a black man in a nice car and assumed he could get away with anything. That's a systemic problem. It's the very thing the Racial Justice Act was designed to prevent. This investigation needs to be a message not just to Miller, but to every officer who thinks a badge gives them the right to trample on the Constitution. Rostova nodded, her face grim. "I understand, Senator. And I can tell you this, the preliminary review of the dash cam footage corroborates your and Mr. Harris's accounts entirely." She didn't elaborate, but she didn't have to. The footage was the silent, objective witness. It would show Miller's aggressive approach. It would capture the audio of his questions, his accusations, and his lies. It would show the absence of any reasonable suspicion. And most damningly, it would show his instant fawning retreat the moment he saw the senator's ID. The tape would be the nail in his coffin. Meanwhile, Officer Mark Miller was living in a state of suspended animation. He had been placed on paid administrative leave, a standard procedure that felt anything but standard. He was ordered to stay home, turn in his badge and service weapon, and not speak to anyone about the case. The official story was that it was a routine inquiry into a citizen complaint. But Miller knew better. The involvement of a state senator, especially one as powerful as Davenport, turned this into something else entirely. This was a witch hunt. He paced the floors of his suburban home, a tempest of anger and paranoia raging within him. He felt betrayed. He had been doing his job, keeping the streets safe. The I-285 corridor was a known drug route. A flashy car, a young black driver in his mind that was a textbook profile. It was good police work. He had been proactive. Now he was being crucified for it. His wife Sarah tried to be supportive, but she couldn't understand the full scope of his predicament. "It's just one complaint, Mark," she said, trying to soothe him. "You've had complaints before. They always get dropped. This isn't just any complaint, Sarah." He roared, his voice echoing in the too quiet house. "This was a state senator, the head of the damn Judiciary Committee. They're not going to just drop this. They're coming for me. They're trying to make an example out of me." He was right. Captain Rostova's investigation was expanding. Following the senator's demand, she had requested Miller's file. What she found was a pattern. Over his 8-year career with the state patrol officer, Miller had received 12 citizen complaints. 9 of them were for harassment and illegal searches. 8 of those 9 complaints were filed by African-American men. All 12 complaints had been investigated by Miller's direct supervisor, a sergeant nearing retirement, and all 12 had been dismissed as unfounded. But Rostova wasn't just looking at the complaints. She pulled the data on Miller's traffic stops for the past 2 years. The numbers told a story that was impossible to ignore. Miller initiated traffic stops on minority drivers at a rate nearly 3 times higher than the average for his patrol zone. And his hit rate, the percentage of stops that resulted in the discovery of contraband or evidence of a serious crime, was abysmal. He was stopping hundreds of people, the vast majority of them black and brown, and finding almost nothing. It wasn't proactive policing. It was harassment on a massive scale. Rostova's next step was to re-interview the complainants from Miller's file. She found a man named Marcus Thorne, no relation to the colonel. A plumber who had been pulled over by Miller for having a supposedly obscured license plate because of a standard-issue frame from the dealership. Miller had claimed to smell marijuana, forcibly removed Thorne from his van, and ransacked the vehicle, dumping tools and supplies all over the shoulder of the road. He found nothing. Thorne filed a complaint, but it went nowhere. She found a college student named Jamal, who was stopped for going 2 miles over the speed limit. Miller had grilled him about where he got the money for his 2012 Honda Accord, a car his parents had bought him. The dashcam footage from that stop showed Miller being verbally abusive and mocking. Again, a complaint was filed and dismissed. The stories were all depressingly similar. A flimsy pretext for the stop, an immediate escalation, an accusation of drug possession, and an aggressive, fruitless search. The only difference between those cases and David's was the man in the passenger seat. The weight of the evidence was becoming overwhelming. Captain Rostova now had dashcam footage from the incident with David, a documented history of racial profiling, and a series of credible witnesses who could attest to a clear and disturbing pattern of behavior. The investigation was no longer just about a single traffic stop. It was about a rogue officer who had been allowed to operate with impunity for years. The hard karma the senator had spoken of was no longer a distant threat. It was a storm gathering on the horizon, and Officer Mark Miller was standing directly in its path. The reckoning was coming, and it was going to be far more severe than he could ever have imagined. The official letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. It was thin, formal, and carried the seal of the Georgia Department of Public Safety. Officer Mark Miller, still on administrative leave, tore it open with trembling hands. The words inside were cold and bureaucratic, but their meaning was as devastating as a physical blow. He was to appear before a disciplinary review board in 2 weeks. The charges were numerous violation of department policy regarding traffic stops, abuse of authority, unprofessional conduct, and the most damning of all, untruthfulness. The charge of untruthfulness was the killer. It was a career ender. A cop who lies cannot be trusted to testify in court. A cop who can't testify is useless. They call it the Brady List. Once your name is on it, your credibility as a law enforcement officer is shot forever. The investigation had found that his claim of smelling marijuana during the stop of David Harris was a deliberate fabrication, a lie told to manufacture probable cause. The dashcam audio was crystal clear. There was no mention of any odor until after David had challenged the legitimacy of the stop. It was the last desperate gambit of a bully who wasn't getting his way, and it had backfired spectacularly. Miller crumpled the letter in his fist, a strangled roar of fury and despair escaping his lips. This wasn't just a suspension. This was an execution. They were taking everything from him, his job, his pension, his identity. For 8 years he had been Officer Miller. It was who he was. What would he be without the badge, the uniform, the gun? He would be nothing. A failure. He hired a lawyer through the police union, a weary, overworked attorney who had seen this all before. The lawyer laid out the grim reality. "Mark, the evidence is overwhelming," he said, his voice devoid of optimism. "They have the video. They have the senator's testimony. And now, they have a mountain of data showing a pattern of biased policing. Your complaint history is a disaster. They're not just looking at the one stop anymore. They're looking at your whole career." "It's a witch hunt," Miller insisted, his voice cracking. "Davenport is using this to push his political agenda. The Racial Justice Act, all that liberal nonsense. I'm the sacrificial lamb." Maybe so, the lawyer conceded. "But it doesn't change the facts. You gave them the ammunition. A lot of it. Our best bet is to try and negotiate a resignation in lieu of termination. You walk away, keep your record clean of a firing. Maybe salvage a portion of your pension. It's the only play we have. Resign." The word was poison. It was surrender. It was an admission of guilt. Miller refused. He would fight. He would go before the board and defend himself. He would tell them he was a good cop, a proactive cop, and that he was being railroaded by politics. The day of the hearing arrived. The disciplinary review board consisted of 3 high-ranking officers. Captain Rostova was there to present the findings of her investigation. Senator Davenport and David Harris had been asked to attend not as witnesses in a criminal trial, but as the primary complainants. Miller sat at a table with his lawyer, looking pale and gaunt, in a suit that didn't quite fit right. He looked smaller without his uniform diminished. Captain Rostova was methodical and relentless. She presented the dashcam footage from the stop, freezing the frame on Miller's face as he lied about the marijuana, then showing his panicked expression when the senator produced his ID. She presented the statistical analysis of his traffic stops, a damning portrait of racial bias. She presented the summaries of her interviews with the other complainants, men like Marcus Thorne, the plumber, whose stories painted a consistent picture of harassment. When it was Miller's turn to speak, he was a shadow of his former self. His bravado was gone, replaced by a desperate, pleading tone. He tried to paint himself as a victim, a dedicated officer caught in the crosshairs of a political vendetta. "I've dedicated my life to this job," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've missed birthdays, anniversaries, all to keep the streets safe. Yes, I'm aggressive. Yes, I'm proactive. That's what it takes in this line of work. You have to be. You have to make judgment calls. Maybe I made a mistake that day. Maybe I was wrong. But I am not a racist, and I am not a liar. But the board had seen the evidence. They had seen the video. They had seen the numbers. His words rang hollow. The decision was swift and unanimous. The board recommended termination of employment for Officer Mark Miller, effective immediately. They sustained all charges, including the fatal charge of untruthfulness. His name would be forwarded for inclusion on the state's Brady list. His career in law enforcement was over. The news hit the local media like a bombshell. State trooper fired after harassing state senator's aide, the headlines screamed. The story was picked up by national news outlets, becoming a flashpoint in the ongoing debate about policing and racial justice. Officer Miller's name and face were everywhere, a symbol of police misconduct. The karma, however, did not stop there. The fallout from the investigation was just beginning. The district attorney's office, prompted by the findings and public pressure, launched a review of every single case in which Officer Miller was the primary arresting officer. They were looking for convictions that relied solely on Miller's testimony cases that could now be compromised by his inclusion on the Brady list. Dozens of cases were flagged. Several convictions for minor drug offenses cases built on the foundation of a pretextual stop, and Miller's questionable probable cause were overturned. Men who had been sent to prison on the word of a dishonest cop were set free. The ripple effect of his misconduct was unwinding the very fabric of the justice he claimed to be upholding. But the most personal blow was yet to come. The story had brought unwanted attention to Miller's family. His address was leaked online by activist groups. Protesters gathered on his street, holding signs with his face on them, chanting slogans about police brutality. His wife, Sra, was terrified. His children were harassed at school. The life they had built in their quiet suburban neighborhood became a living hell. One evening, after weeks of relentless stress and public shame, Sarah sat him down at the kitchen table. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face etched with exhaustion and despair. "I can't do this anymore, Mark," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I can't live like this. The threats, the reporters, the way people look at us, our children are afraid to go outside. It'll blow over." He insisted, a hollow echo of his earlier defiance. "No, it won't," she said, shaking her head. "This is our life now. You did this, Mark. Your anger, your arrogance. You brought this down on us. I asked you to get help for your temper years ago. You refused. You always had to be the tough guy, the one in control. Well, look at you now. You've lost control of everything." She slid a manila envelope across the table. Divorce papers. Miller stared at them, the finality of it all crashing down on him. He had lost his job. He had lost his reputation. He had lost his pension. And now he was losing his family. The arrogance that had fueled him for so long had burned his entire world to the ground, leaving him with nothing but the ashes. Meanwhile, David Harris watched the events unfold with a complex mix of emotions. There was a sense of vindication, of course. A wrong had been righted. A dangerous man had been removed from a position of power. But there was no joy in it. He took no pleasure in Miller's suffering in the collapse of his life. He and Senator Davenport had become something of a team champions for the cause of police reform. They testified before legislative committees, using their story as a powerful example of why change was needed. The Racial Justice Act, which had been a piece of well-meaning but often ignored legislation, was suddenly infused with new life. It was amended, strengthened, and given real teeth. The Miller case, as it came to be known, led to a statewide mandate for enhanced de-escalation and implicit bias training for all law enforcement. Data collection on traffic stops became more rigorous and transparent. One afternoon, months after the incident, David found himself driving down the same stretch of I-285. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over the city. He thought about that day, about the fear and the humiliation. He thought about Officer Miller, a man so consumed by his own prejudices that he couldn't see the humanity in the person in front of him. He realized that the hard karma that had hit Miller wasn't some mystical force of cosmic retribution. It was simply the logical conclusion of his own actions. It was the bill for his arrogance and hatred coming due. He had built a house of cards on a foundation of lies and prejudice, and the slightest gust of wind in the form of a man who refused to be silenced, and a witness who had the power to make them listen, had brought it all tumbling down. The system had for once worked. Not perfectly, and not without a powerful push, but it had worked. And for David Harris, that was a start. It was a reason to keep fighting. The legacy of that traffic stop wasn't just the downfall of one officer. It was a catalyst for change, a harsh but necessary lesson in accountability. Officer Miller's hard karma was not just his own. It was a warning to all those who would abuse their power, a stark reminder that sometimes the person you pull over might just be the one who pulls the pin on your career. The story of Officer Miller is a stark reminder that true justice requires accountability. It's not just about one bad apple. It's about a system that for too long has protected them. David Harris was fortunate to have a man of influence in his car, but how many others are not so lucky? Their stories are never told, and their rights are violated in silence. This incident born of prejudice became a catalyst for real, tangible change in Georgia law, proving that when people in power witness injustice firsthand, they can be moved to act. If this story moved you, please consider what you can do to support police reform in your own community. Let's continue the conversation. Hit that like button. If you believe in accountability, share this video to spread awareness and subscribe to our channel for more stories that need to be heard. Thank you for watching.